like to introduce my colleagues, Dr. Desiree Hurtak to my right, and John Whitmore, Dr. John Whitmore to my left, who've been with us literally as a team for 40 years. This is Dr. Jim Hurtak speaking to you on the rapid changes we're seeing, particularly what some would call the environmental changes. Green revolution perhaps could be called greed revolution, according to John Whitmore, and you've got this terrific book that we'd like to focus on.
So I'd like to introduce Sir John Whitmore from England, and he's a professional racing driver. He was a businessman. He's been well known for his work with coaching. We've worked with him for many years. His forte really has been coaching and team building. He's gone to many of the top business enclaves, we'll say, throughout Europe, and has dialogue with some of the heads of state throughout the world in trying to get them to work together. His book, which he did in the 90s, and he's done many other books since then, is entitled Need, Greed, or Freedom. John, tell us a little bit about the work you're doing right now.
Well, I was doing a lot of coaching work until about 3 years ago, and I felt that what I was seeing in businesses were that people were very focused on their immediate short-term results, and they were not seeing that the changing conditions in the world were changing how they needed to run the business. So I tried to get them to pay more attention to the global issues than they did. It's not just a small issue. And it was quite a struggle. They're so focused on money and profit and the immediate and the short term that they don't think, and they think that's somebody else's problem. But the thing is that we are all connected now. We have to be whole system thinkers. We can't just be silo box people anymore.
Yeah, I know we were talking about the fact that the population increase, although large, now at 7 billion people in the world, still the percentage of increase is actually slowing due to births being slowed down, actually all over the world. And I think that what businesses don't understand is this is actually affecting the idea of growth, because we've always had this idea of a growth economy based on the growth of population. So there are many, that's an example of how a global issue that's taking place actually affects the local business, and they tend to ignore this. So some of the other work you're doing also, you're no longer doing coaching, and so what's your immediate function?
Well, I had to take the global issues seriously because business people don't. So I began to introduce them in my conferences in many different countries. And I'm bringing this in because I find that both coaches and business people are very unaware of those issues. So I feel a responsibility to bring in those things. And I'm not a scientist, and I'm not a specialist in any of those systems. And that's actually helpful because I use normal human language. And I think one of the difficulties with scientists trying to persuade business people is that business people may not understand the language that scientists use sometimes.
Precisely. This is what we'll call the technical jargon that allows one area of the mind not to relate to the other. And we see this in the technical scientific work of the late 80s, 90s, where you've had this technological drift toward self-destruction of not looking at the environmental eventualities that come out of a direction that is too, shall we say, specialized in one type of outlook and language without the ability to be pluralistic conversation.
But you tend to be a positivist, right? You do feel, I know, even in your book here, you talk about higher levels of intelligence, so you must feel that they're helping the planet somewhat. And so do you feel we have a future?
I do feel we have a future. I think the process we're going through is a process of evolution which is accelerated by all the circumstances that are happening as you bring in new technology and all those things. There's a speeding up of the process, and the difficulty is the changes with individuals are not keeping up with the external changes that are occurring, and therefore we want to close this gap that exists between them. And so that's what I'm very much focused on, in a way that they can understand, to introduce things. For example, when you increase the temperature of the ocean by 2 degrees, it may be fine because when you go out and swim you'll be more comfortable or something. But some other part of the world is influenced by that 2-degree change, and that can kill a lot of people somewhere else, because we have to see that these things all connect up with each other. And that's what I've been looking at very much, is the connectivity of all these issues.
Right, talking about business and commerce, I know the Mississippi River, which is one of our major
Arteries.
arteries of commercial shipping in the United States, actually had to be closed for a while because of the lack of water, the lack of
Yeah.
rain caused by environmental destruction.
In the United Nations has noted there's 64 areas of critical change. The land-ocean systems
Yeah.
are being threatened by global weather. The heating up of the oceans basically will cause the demise of future food sources.
Yeah.
And so futurists, social scientists, writers, thinkers like ourselves need to look at the positive dialogue in the global comments that we need to, shall we say, focus more on through our work in literature, films, radio, and speaking programs that we all have been a part of.
Yeah, and I'm very interested, as you say, in this positive attitude, because I'm excited by the opportunities that exist. The unfortunate thing is that the politicians and the bankers and people like that who are very silo thinking, they find it difficult to adopt these new ideas that have to be put into place if we're going to survive, to be honest.
Well, I think the Industrial Revolution, as we saw from the Olympics, it really was founded in England.
Yeah.
But now I think we're moving into a new phase called the technological era.
Yeah.
And so it's the shift from the industrial era to the technological era that we're in the midst of.
Yeah.
And it's really shaking our economy, but there's so many possibilities that we need to use. And I
Yeah.
think this...
Well, I really agree. It really needs to be understood well, though, because you can see the great advantages in the new technology. But I asked a group of business people in a conference I was running with a small group of people. I said, can you be really honest and tell me whether you feel you have gained time or money with the internet and the things you've got with that? And you know, every one of them said no, they have not gained. And that is that it takes time to bring in the changes, and the technology people get very excited about their new technology, but they don't look at the usefulness of it. And there are many things that are being done in a technological sense with IT and all that sort of stuff that are not user-friendly. And when you have a big change in a big issue, for example, when we went from horses to cars,
Yeah, exactly.
it took about 30 years for us to get accustomed to different types of roads and fuel and that sort of thing. It takes time to make the change, and people are not accustomed to
So
that.
what you're talking about is a consciousness infrastructure that needs to be built between the different parts of society, and particularly in the context of globalization. Going so fast, we need what I call peopleization, people
Yeah.
rediscovering themselves through hands-on applications, not of complete systems, but of systems that are holistic, that work with the end product being that the human society as well as the surrounding environment are mutually balanced and enriched.
100%, and you mentioned people. I mean, I talk about people skills. What happens is people have spent more focus on the knowledge they get and less on the people skills, which is more on the wisdom side, because if you are going to do a lot of new things, you've got to have the sense to do it correctly, and we need quantity and quality. What we've got is quantity, which is knowledge, and we haven't got the wisdom that we need to manage that quantity effectively, and we are doing some very bad things. For example, we got very excited when we found coal and oil, and we thought it was unlimited because we didn't know anything about it in those days, and that gave us steel. So we made bridges, we made railways, we made steel ships, and all sorts of things grew as a result of that thing, and people got very excited. Population grew at that time, and wealth grew at that time. They were very excited. What they didn't do is to recognize that down the road this was going to cause some problems, and the problem we have now with the environmental thing and the economic crisis
Even
is
peak
absolutely because of that.
I think people are now acknowledging that peak oil took place. Probably, I think 2008 is the official
Yeah.
date. And although more oil, more gas can always be found, I mean, we're changing. Things are changing, and we have to change with them.
Yeah, and it's and the there are some things that are small enough to be understood, or should we say simple enough to be understood. But unfortunately, a lot of these things, people sort of can't believe certain things. I mean, for example, there is a source of energy that we can pull from space back to Earth, and the authorities are still thinking that we ought to build more nuclear power stations, and we can get a massive amount of energy in a different way. But it's very difficult for them to shift from here to here. And when we are thinking about this, we can do it, and it's obvious. And they don't do it because they are only thinking about the small things in the short term.
When we were in Japan, we talked to Japanese engineers and scientists who felt that even with this tragedy, perhaps this would shift people to look at non-nuclear directions. And if we could say that in a positive way, some of the European governments responded by basically looking in a new direction. So we see the vectors of a need for new energy, alternative resources that need to be managed, new educational directives to bring young people in. Also, we have this ability to shift from a consumer-based to a collective understanding of human issues, a science that is human-orientated rather than object-orientated. And all of these vectors coming together really require a whole new ontology of life. All of the experts realize that we can either go over the cliff and go back in history, or take a quantum leap in consciousness if we look at the signs and the opportunities that come out of a crisis situation. That is to say, a crisis situation can incubate a breakthrough into self-discovery, who we really are, authentic beings that are multidimensional, have these resources that you spoke of, in bringing energy from space, but also seeing that we can create space habitats. We are no longer landlubbers, three-dimensionalists who have absolutely nothing to say about our future. So
there
what is
are
your
many
feeling?
ways of doing these things. They are doable, and you did mention something else now that I think we have to say, that although there is much more positive thinking arising now, and I'm excited by that, and I feel optimistic about the future, but still we have some things that are very harmful, and consumerism, a part of it is just because consumerism, when we consume more, obviously environmentally this is bad, and the pressure of businesses to grow the economy. They talk about the growth of the economy.
I think this is over. I haven't realized it, but it's over.
Crazy. I mean, that is really going on. And environmentally, I mean, we want less and less, not more and more. But when you're trying to sell stuff, you're always more and more, and that is actually an illness, I would say, that humanity has right now, and we have to wake up.
I think it's very sad because a lot of economists say, oh, the economy only grew by 0.2% or something, we wanted it at 1%. But I think those days are over, and a lot of it is the environment, that we've taken too much from the environment, we don't have much more to give. I think a lot of it is the population, I think a lot of it is the technological era. So I think all of humanity, especially those of the West, have to get used to this 0.2% growth instead of the 2% itself growth. And this is going to be a real shift for people, a crisis for people. I think even some people might even go to a 4-day work week because there won't be enough opportunity for others. But you know, if we see it as a different scenario, if we don't see it as the greed, but rather the need for sharing, then I think we can start to understand that we would have more free time, more opportunities, if we don't need all that extra stuff that we've been accumulating.
The trouble that I would have to say, and this is a challenging thing to say, that the notion of capitalism is about growth of the economy through competition. And we have to move beyond that in our evolutionary journey to get to the point that we start to collaborate, not to compete. And when you've got the whole planet competing with each other because of this obsession with material goods, that is a very difficult thing to do, but that is the real change. We will not solve the problems of the world until we go to the next level of how we structure change of goods and services, or exchange of goods and services with each other, not based on competition.
We're actually talking about the fact of having what we need.
Yeah.
and just not having the greed.
And there
So
are
it's a
many
shift.
different ways
Yeah.
to exchange goods and services. We have done it with this thing called money. And the trouble is now that instead of the goods and services being focused on, many people are focused on the money and not the goods and services.
Right.
And of course, humanity is going to survive by having goods and services and sharing things, not just by making money. So we are being very simple-minded at the moment.
Well,
to
it's a
persuade
consciousness shift, though.
And we've seen this among the indigenous people
Yeah.
in Brazil and South America, of how they can exchange just by a small token
Yeah,
a whole aspect of life, because there is that mutual respect and sustainability that is
Absolutely.
built into the way people work as a complementary
Yeah.
habitat. And this is part of the new sociology that we need, the new psychology that revolves around a vision that we have shared for 40 years, which is the fact that we are part of a, what I call, higher evolutionary process.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
we are beings prepared to, should we say, be citizens of the universe in the sense of being universal humans, recognizing that we're here to share, not to exploit. We're here to balance and overcome the unholy trinity of competition, acquisition, consumption that
Yeah.
has pulled us too much one way or the other. We have to rebalance this, and in this we have what we recognize as a type of emergent spirituality. And I'd like to get your views on what you see in terms of how we can bring together a more harmonious dialogue with spiritual values.
well, I think different people have very different views about the meaning of the word spiritual or religion and that sort of thing, and I think that gets a bit concerning. But I think that in the eastern side of the world, for example, if you go into your self-development, spirituality begins to emerge automatically, and the first sign of that very often is people begin to feel that they have some purpose for being alive. They don't necessarily associate it with God or religion or anything at that stage, but they begin to feel purposeful. We have a tendency in the West to go into reductionist thinking, which is, well, that's God, or that's the science, or something like that, and we don't connect up these things, and that's what I mean by whole system thinking. And it's very, very important that we begin to become whole system and accept that personal development, and you used the word consciousness just now, the real hope is a change of human consciousness, or the improvement or the raising of human consciousness. And that inevitably brings in this purposefulness. And what I've noticed, where I run some systems for getting to people to look at their own purpose. And what's very interesting, when people begin to see a purpose, every single person, I've done this exercise with, which is probably 500 people now, every time they see a purpose, it's always a contribution to other people, not selfishness themselves. And I find absolutely fascinating that deeper thing, you're getting deeper into their heart, and what comes out is that goodness of caring for other people. That's where we have to go.
I think that's the essence of hopefully the future, where we start to see the interconnectedness that we all share. And so it's not taking for ourselves, but it's understanding the needs of others, not even just of ourselves, and being able to share that with one another. And I think this is so important if we can continue a little bit with the business community. I know, many people saw the price of oil going up, so they all wanted to buy stock and get that economics. Other people said, hey, if I keep wanting to buy stock in oil, the price is going to keep going up. That's not helping me, and that's not helping anyone else. So that's the greed, or the non-greed is what they were saying. And they started understanding that there's no reason to buy that oil stock just because it's going to make money, because it's going to hurt humanity.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of shifts in economic consciousness that we need to start experiencing.
Yeah, and I think we have to, I think it's very important that we bring this into education, because I think a lot of people get stuck in their way of thinking at a certain age. And I think if we can begin to get younger people to think better, I mean, I feel that education is a very important issue now, because I think for many of us, in the sense, we're not going to fix it in this generation, but the next generation are going to be the people who have an enormous responsibility. It's very much our responsibility to give them the kind of education that they need to have. And it's not just repetitious sort of education that they've had in the past. It's a different consciousness in their education.
The whole model of a university without walls
Yeah.
inspired us to put together what we call the Academy for Future Science, which is a nonprofit organization working worldwide to bring the new tools of learning for rapid applications on a cross-cultural basis.
Yeah.
Unless we can talk to brothers and sisters of the developing countries, we haven't had an understanding of the vision of the future.
And I think that's also the essence of Sir John Whitmore's work, to educate humanity to not only what we need to do in terms of making ourselves a better person in consciousness, but also to help the planet. And so I think we've kind of come full circle.
And particularly at a time when people see the end of things, we feel just the opposite. This is the beginning of a greater cycle of consciousness opportunity, a greater opportunity to speak to the world humanity and to recognize that we need to forge a charter of interdependence, of how we are holistic beings. We are, in practical language, beings of a divine spark, and in valuing the divine spark in every living thing, we basically complete the Adam and Eve story and prepare ourselves to move into the greater universe, contact with cosmic cultures and civilizations that perhaps are waiting for us to grow up. To smell the coffee, which is the lifeblood of Mother Earth, which is the water, not the oil, which is the human heartbeat, not the structured theology, which is the consciousness that sees and shares the Om of omniscience within all life.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think the trouble is people get seduced by the material goods they get, and they don't see the beauty of nature and all of the things that are in front of us every day, which is other people, animals, and things like that we can relate to, and they're looking for acquiring more, and the beauties of life are all around us, and if only people would look closer to home, they would feel richer, if you like. You know.
Very well said.
So, John, we want to thank you very much for this exciting conversation.
Can you tell us your website?
Yes, I have a website called performanceconsultants.com.
Okay.
Is the website, and there's quite a lot of things on there if anyone wants to go and see it.
Thank you.
So this is Dr. Jim Hurtak, Dr. Desiree Hurtak, and Dr. John Whitmore saying, look up with a smile in your heart, out Astra to the stars. Keep up the work of global harmony and global unity. May peace on earth prevail. We thank you.
Thank you.